The Lone Ranger is a 15-chapter film serial from Republic Pictures that made its debut in the year 1938. The Lone Ranger makes his first appearance in his own self-titled radio drama by January 30th, 1933, and was created by George W. Trendle and Fran Stryker. While the audience is not initially privy to the actor who portrays the Lone Ranger, the character is a former Texas Ranger turned masked crime fighter on the American frontier. A newspaper comic strip from King Features Syndicate would adapt the adventures of the Lone Ranger beginning on September 30th in the year 1938. This comic strip would continue until December of the year 1971. The film serial is set shortly after the end of the American Civil War. Based on the intel of one of his slimy, Starscream-esque informants named Joe Sneed, the outlaw Captain Smith abducts a Colonel Marcus Jeffries. This is the newly appointed Commissioner of Finance for the state of Texas, who is quickly dispatched. Soon after, Captain Smith then takes his place, taxing the people of Texas into oblivion, declaring martial law, and denying them their Second Amendment rights so they cannot oppose him. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Don't surrender your gun!
Prior to 1938, the Lone Ranger's origin remained a mystery on the radio series. However, this film serial actually introduces elements of what would later become part of the official canonical origin. The serial reveals that a group of Texas Rangers are ambushed on the orders of Captain Smith, now going by the Colonel Jeffries moniker. The weasel Joe Sneed is the Judas who lures the Rangers into Smith's ambush. The pseudo-army troops, who are actually just redressed members of the old Smith gang, massacre the Texas Rangers in a canyon gunfight. In the dead of night, the only survivor is carried away, Crisis on Infinite Earth style, by the American Indian Tonto. Victor Daniels, credited in the serial as Chief Thundercloud, would portray the Lone Ranger's companion Tonto. Believe it or not, Tonto was not actually in the first 10 radio episodes. By the 11th episode, writer Fran Stryker decided that a true Lone Ranger would have no one to talk to, and Tonto was created to fill that void on February 25th in the year 1933.
You're not well. The others, are they?
All the Rangers, all dead. You only man Tonto find alive.
The only one. The Lone Ranger. I'll never rest until those deaths are avenged.
Once Tonto patches him up, the survivor dons a mask, taking up the identity of the Lone Ranger, and travels the countryside on his white stallion named Silver. Using his trademark silver bullets, the Lone Ranger leads a group of oppressed ranchers to fight the political tyranny of Captain Smith in his stolen identity as Colonel Jeffries.
Boys, from now on, you're all going to be known as troopers. And you're now looking at Colonel Marcus Jeffries, the new Commissioner of Finance.
Similar to the masked rider in the Tex Granger film serial, the Lone Ranger's true identity remains a mystery to the audience until the final chapter of the piece. However, the audience is treated to a set of 5 potential suspects. Alan King, played by Lee Powell, Bob Stewart, played by Hal Taliaferro, Jim Clark, played by George Letts, Burt Rogers, played by Herman Bricks, and Dick Forrest, played by Lane Chandler. When all 5 suspects share scenes together, they're kind of a hoot to watch. Not because of any terrific acting or anything, but simply because it's the Lone Ranger and his 4 decoys. There's a pretty sweet scene where one of the henchmen, Kester, thinks he's figured out which one is the Lone Ranger because he's pulled off the spur on his boot in a skirmish. However, the Ranger suspects must have been watching Batman Begins because the entire lineup of men all have broken spurs on their boots. It's really too bad that one by one these poor guys are bumped off throughout the course of the mystery, thereby eliminating potential suspects for the audience.
You the Lone Ranger? Well, are you? Sure. I'm the Lone Ranger.
Taking legal recourse on Smith, or Fake Jeffries, is attempted when President Lincoln sends Special Administrative Detective George Blanchard to investigate the current state of affairs. Blanchard heads to Texas, bringing his daughter Joan along for the trip. Of course, once Fake Jeffries receives a telegram detailing the assassination of President Lincoln, he pretty much laughs off the special detective and holds Blanchard's daughter hostage to procure more administrative powers.
All right, that's enough. It does no good to oppose me.
President Lincoln sent me here personally. Unless he hears from me within 24 hours, he'd have the cavalry in.
Oh, no, my friend. Lincoln has been assassinated.
Assassinated?
Yes.
Blanchard may be beaten, quite literally, but his daughter Joan still helps out the Lone Ranger and the other Texas ranchers by passing along secret notes by messenger pigeon with intel on Fake Jeffries' plans and schemes. One plot sees Fake Jeffries trick Comanche Indians into thinking the Lone Ranger is their enemy by leaving silver bullets amongst their murdered warriors. Other designs involve the villain stockpiling all the gunpowder and tacked silver in the state for himself. His primary goal, of course, is to slay any of the 5 men suspected to be the Lone Ranger.
I have some good news, and I didn't want to keep it from you. 2 of the Rangers have just been killed. They were trapped in a well.
Was the Lone Ranger one of them?
I hope so.
Joan is also frequently used as bait. Later, she and her father discover Fake Jeffries is really the wanted outlaw Captain Smith. At one point, it looks like Joan will be forced to marry Smith lest her father be killed as punishment for refusing his proposal. The Ranger crashes and stops the wedding and eventually saves Joan and her father in a daring stagecoach rescue that becomes a literal cliffhanger. Eventually, Smith gets the bright idea to track the messenger pigeons back to the Ranger's secret cave, which leads to the final climactic showdown between Smith and the Lone Ranger.
At any rate, I'm going to settle with the Lone Ranger.
Unfortunately, there is quite a bit of filler in the recap segments, and Chapter 13 is just a dreaded clip show with filler from the first chapter. Plus, the cliffhangers and their resolutions certainly leave something to be desired. The Lone Ranger just fell straight off Silver into a burning fire, and then the next chapter he's like, hey, I'm A-okay! Never mind the idiocy that is the Lone Ranger getting clunked by Secret Rock Toss. I will say that I like the Ranger's booming voice provided by Billy Bletcher, and Chief Thundercloud makes a believably loyal Tonto. No matter how the bad guys torture him, he doesn't give up anything on his friend the Lone Ranger. Another thing I learned is you do not mess with Silver, or he will kill your ass.
Steady, Silver.
One of the big fights on a horse-drawn stagecoach is also pretty damn impressive and totally reminds me of Indiana Jones. Even though the radio series origin gives Reed as the true last name of the Lone Ranger, by the end of the film serial, Alan King is unmasked as the Lone Ranger. Despite having some poor Hop Harrigan-style cliffhangers, for the most part, the first Lone Ranger serial is pretty enjoyable.
All right, Lone Ranger. This is your finish.
Oh, no, it isn't.
They were trapped in a well.
Was the Lone Ranger one of them?
I hope so.